Hey, Glenn, thanks for the wreath. It's turned out really beautiful for the engine. Really appreciate that.
I'm glad it worked when they said that's what they wanted it for. I thought, oh gosh. So did it hold up to being driven around?
So far, so good.
Cool.
I'm going to go ahead and you got about 2 minutes left, but I'm going to go ahead and start this recording.
I just flipped over to 6:30, so let's go ahead and call to order a regular scheduled planning commission meeting for City of Hubbard for December 7th or 17th, excuse me. Like to welcome everybody. We've got a fair crowd here for us. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the
To the
flag
flag
of the
of the
United
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 States of
States of
America,
America,
and to the
to the
to
republic
the
republic
republic for
for
which
which it
that
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
nation
under
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 God,
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 indivisible,
indivisible,
visible,
with
with
liberty and
liberty and
liberty
justice
and
justice
for
for
all.
all.
justice for all.
All right, first up on our agenda tonight is item number 2, Planning Commission work session. I will probably go ahead and turn that over to Holly if you wanted to. Do you have stuff you want to lead on that? And then between you and Sean and
Sure, that sounds great.
okay.
Unless Sean, you wanted any words to start us off?
No, I think you can go ahead.
Okay, great. For the record, my name is Holly Byram and I work for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. My role as the consulting city planner is to help the Planning Commission understand any land use applications before them and the items on their agenda. So this first agenda item is a work session, and this is a follow-up to the October agenda item, which was a work session of the Planning Commission for a proposal to amend the Hubbard Development Code. The purpose being a discussion about adding provisions for horizontal mixed-use developments. And just to refresh our memories, a mixed-use development allows both employment land and employment uses and residential uses on the same project. At this time, Hubbard's main commercial corridor and the 3rd Street corridor are both zoned general commercial. And residential uses are only allowed essentially on the 2nd and 3rd floors above your ground floor commercial. We've had a developer approach the city requesting to make amendments to the Hubbard Development Code commercial zone only to allow for horizontal mixed use, which means that you could have residential uses and commercial uses on the same project, the same property, side by side. And we wouldn't have concerns about what was on the ground floor. The reason for this is it can provide some better developments, potentially easier access to funding opportunities for those projects. And having the mixed uses on the same site can often provide customers for those businesses as well within walking distance, so you're not so auto dependent. So over the past few months, we've had some work sessions with the Planning Commission and the City Council. In October, the Planning Commission had their final work session to prepare their language to take to public hearing. And at that time, what resulted was a recommendation that for a horizontal mixed-use project, overall, there should be a cap on the balance between the residential component and the commercial component. And the reason for that recommendation was we heard some concerns about wanting to ensure that our commercial properties still provided opportunities for businesses to locate in Hubbard. We liked the idea essentially of mixed use, but we didn't want to completely give it away to these large multifamily residential projects. And so the recommendation was to allow up to 50% of the total floor area of the project to be residential. And then there was a limitation on what the frontage could be as well. Following the last work session, we heard some additional feedback from the developers, and the concern was that as the code currently stands, a developer could develop more than 50% of the total floor area of a project as residential. And so essentially the recommended language would be limiting what's already allowed, albeit the residential could not be on the ground floor. So the feedback was a request for staff and the Planning Commission to consider allowing no cap on the total floor area of a project, that the cap would simply apply to the ground floor, so the footprint of a project. And the request was to allow up to let's see, I believe it was 80% residential on the ground floor. So it would be up to 80% residential, and that would leave 20% commercial on the ground floor. And then upper floors could be unlimited residential. And then there were also recommendations for frontage, requiring a certain percentage of the frontage to be occupied by buildings, so it didn't just feel like a big parking lot from the front of the property. And then of the buildings on the frontage, requiring a certain percentage to be commercial. So it still feels very much like a commercial property when you're driving down 99E or you're driving down 3rd Street. Staff had some concerns about allowing up to 80% of the footprint to be residential, specifically because of the timing of the economic opportunities analysis being performed right now. And so we reached out to our EOA consultant, Jerry Johnson of Johnson Economics, and we ran the new proposal by him, and he said that there would be impacts to the capacity of commercial properties by allowing up to 80% of the ground floor to be residential plus unlimited upper stories. He mentioned some projects that he was familiar with that with that requirement of 20% commercial, those multifamily projects could meet that 20% simply with their leasing office and the gym that serves the multifamily project. So he said he's familiar with projects that could come into this kind of a code and completely occupy the entire site with a multifamily project and not provide any commercial space for local businesses to locate on that property. And so staff felt like we needed to strike a compromise here. Obviously, there's interest. We hear the Planning Commission and the City Council say they want mixed use, but they still want local businesses to locate on that project. So what you'll see in the packet today is a recommendation from staff requiring at least 30% of the ground floor to be commercial, and that of that 30% commercial, it be unrelated to the residential component. So that means it would exclude the leasing office and the gym facilities. So that way we ensure that we're still getting opportunities for other businesses to locate on a project site. And then there's also a recommendation of the frontage of a facade, requiring 90% of that front facade to be commercial on the ground floor. We can talk more about frontage. The developer recommended that a portion of the frontage be occupied by a building, so we're not just seeing a parking lot, which is a wonderful idea and it works really well in a lot of codes, but it's different than what Hubbard has currently, especially along 99E. There's no such frontage occupancy requirement, and so we can talk about the value of that and if that's something the Planning Commission wants to see. But I wanted to open it up for some discussion. Perhaps Sean and Vicky have some comments as well. But ultimately, what you see in the public hearing staff report this evening is the staff's compromise after talking with the EOA consultant, which is requiring at least 30% ground floor commercial. So over to you, Sean, if you have any other comments on that.
The only comments I have is that I do think that this is a good compromise. While I do think that Hubbard could really use this type of mixed use, I also want to make sure that we are not limiting ourselves on the type of commercial or additional commercial property that could come in or businesses. So that's why we came up with this compromise of anything that associated like with the lobby or the leasing office and the gym not being included in that commercial piece. And that's all I have. Vicky, do you have any additional comments?
I do not. I think you both covered it.
Thanks, you guys. How about commissioners? Do you guys have questions? Loose-ended questions at this point, since we're not in the public hearing part.
So I've got a concern regarding the 30%. We don't have a lot of commercial land at this point, and I thought 50% would be it would be, I guess, fair. When we're talking vertical and the developer says, well, you have more space or more space for residential on top. Well, that's true, but the footprint of, like you say, an acre, if we if he puts 50% of commercial and what would that be, 75% on top of residential, it would still have the footprint of the property itself being commercial, and that keeps the spirit of the zoning. So that's my biggest concern. I think 30% is it's a mistake, because ultimately it will entice people to come into town, buy the piece of property, and use it as a residential application. So that's my main concern. And if there's any other questions, I can answer.
Thanks, Phil. Anybody else? Do you want to clarify that at all, Holly? I don't know if you've got anything to add to that concern, or to or any perspective to add to that concern.
Because this is a work session at this time, we are open to discussion. I know that there are other members of the public here as well. If you wanted to take any comments at this point before we make a formal recommendation for public hearing. It's kind of unconventional to have both a work session and a hearing on the same evening, but we're trying to work with what we've got here.
Yeah, I can open it up to the comments if there's other folks who want to chime in here.
Hi, I appreciate, this is Jerry Jones of Mocker, and I appreciate you opening that up and being able to allow to offer a few comments. First of all, I just want to say that I have worked in several jurisdictions, and just appreciate the collaboration that we've had so far with Sean and Vicky and Holly as well. This has truly been, I think, a group effort where at one time we were proposing something and then it came back, and just the back and forth coming up to a really good compromise. I feel that it's collaborative in nature, and we've come to something that works. So I want to set some clarity as well too, is like we are not a developer coming in town and seeking to purchase a piece of property. I'm a development consultant, been hired by a longtime property owner within Hubbard who runs quite a large business and loves the city of Hubbard, would like to do more for Hubbard, not just in a residential fashion, but in a commercial fashion as well. So it was easy to regress to the 30%. The numbers are tough to work anything more than that, but we knew that we could do something at 30% with some property owner subsidy at that, because of the nature of his business and what he wants to bring to Hubbard. We would have never thought the idea of using gym space or the lobby and all of that stuff for commercial, right? I understand Jerry Johnson has seen players do that in the development world. That is definitely not our intention. So our intention is to truly bring some small space commercial to Hubbard that would allow for not just folks in Hubbard looking for a place to have residential or to have commercial operations, but hopefully attract some others as well as it becomes very walkable. It's really about the economics of how much could we build for residential to be able to afford to have a commercial space. The commercial space is not always guaranteed, right? So the residential really has to carry the economics of these until a certain number of residential units happen that allow for people want to be in there for commercial, and that's the walkability. So really, I think 20% would have been a sweet spot for us, but we're able to stretch and go to that 30% in hopes that we can get that approved. And I believe what you'll see is the resulting in a future application that really is great for Hubbard, coming from a person that has been in Hubbard for a long time and really cares about Hubbard. So appreciate you being able to allow me to speak on that. I have the architect here who's put some diagrams together. And Holly, I don't know if that's the time for now or the time for that would be in the actual hearing. I see you shaking your head yes. So let me introduce Seth Anderson with Sage, and he has some diagrams if it's helpful to show you really in space making what it looks like for vertical versus horizontal and why these numbers work for us.
Yeah, hi. Can everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
So Seth Anderson with Sage Architecture, and as Jerry said, we have some diagrams we're happy to share. Let me hit the share button here. Make sure. So in conversation with staff about these different types of uses and arrangements on the site, we put together this diagram to show kind of vertical mixed use versus horizontal mixed use and what you get in those two scenarios. So on the left-hand side with the purple buildings, so those would be vertical mixed use arrangement, and then the parking that would be required to serve that, assuming that it is commercial on the ground floor and stacked with residential above. The diagrams on the right are a similar size of commercial, but then having that residential being horizontally oriented. And you can see that it depends a lot on the shape of the property on what you're going to be able to get for percentage comparison on the ground floor. So a smaller square build or lot might be closer to that 50-50 ratio. As that property gets deeper, in order to add more commercial space, you're really starting to put commercial further into the site, which is just not optimal for most businesses. They want that street frontage. So that's where we think the 30% is the good mark for the low end. And then certainly depending on the size of or the shape of the property, you might get 50% coverage on the split between the two. And when we say 50, think about it as for every square foot of residential, you're building a square foot of commercial. So in the long orientation there, if that was about an 8,000 square foot commercial building, you could do about 8,000 square foot in a 50-50 of residential on the ground floor, which would really net you only about 20 units. So not very many units. If you go to more of a 30% ratio, you could drive that a lot larger, and it could be 48 units on the same property. With you haven't decreased the amount of commercial space, you've just added some additional units. So that's how we arrived at the percentages that we got to. And the way that the reason that we had proposed originally the 20% is that on that purple diagram there, you really, of the total floor area, 20% of that is commercial, 80% is residential. But we think the 30%, like Jerry said, is a fair compromise to continue to provide commercial space for the city of Hubbard and on these sites. Any questions on any of that?
Seth, the next page is something that I'd like to make sure the Planning Commission discusses as well in terms
Sure.
of just the concept of frontage occupancy, because that's not something that's required right now in either the 99E corridor or the 3rd Street corridor. And in the right setting, it's absolutely appropriate, but I'm not sure if it is here, specifically because we do have such a large front setback required along 99E. So something for the Planning Commission to consider.
Yeah, so let me cover these different scenarios real quickly. Let's start with the middle set of diagrams. So this is showing if you required 50% of the frontage to be a commercial use, these are what you would end up with. That would still allow some residential use to be adjacent to the street, but that would be still 50% of that frontage is commercial. In the diagrams on the right, what we're saying here is what is currently proposed in that 90% of the building that is along the street be commercial. And then we think that's just good urban planning. That's good town development, because that gives those storefronts proximity to the street. The businesses are seen, the signage is there. And it orients, as Holly said, it orients the commercial to the street, which is what we want to see. So that was the reason for the 90% along there. And then the left side is if you combine those two standards, what those would look like. So it would prohibit any residential along the street. It would require that whatever is placed along the street be commercial, that at least 50% of the frontage is commercial, and that 90% of whatever is built has to be a commercial. But that's not currently what is being proposed, just that 90% of whatever is placed along the street is commercial.
So what that means is that we could have a parking lot out front, which is not unlike a lot of what we see along 99E. That might not work along 3rd Street to have the parking lot out front, but it's certainly common along 99E. So I'd be curious to hear the Planning Commission's thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, questions from anybody? Or comments?
I kind of like the frontage requirement. It seems to make a lot of sense to me. You know, we've talked about some of the challenges of developing these sites from a commercial aspect, and it's, you know, you've got some of these long skinny lots So to make the economics work out, you need that commercial up front, and then you kind of fill in the back with the less commercially viable land. That just seems to make sense for me. I'm not so worried about it necessarily on 3rd Street. Just because there's a parking lot allowed doesn't mean that it would be required along that frontage.
Any other comments, questions? Thanks, Seth, for the graphics and for the presentation. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Yeah, go ahead, Holly.
Question for Seth and his team. If we don't include the 50% frontage occupancy, so we're not requiring a certain percentage of the frontage to be occupied by a building, that defaults to a parking lot up front and buildings in the back. But that's, I mean, would market really dictate that? I mean, it seems like if there were a commercial component, you'd want to have it up front, visible to the traffic, to the corridor. It doesn't seem like the default would be to push the commercial component back. Is that really a threat in this situation if we don't require it by code?
I can touch on that first, Seth. I don't think that's a threat, honestly, Holly, from my perspective. I think that what we were trying to do with that is also pull at some of the intent of your commissioners to make sure that it's forward-thinking business, and that's what we're thinking anyway. So we were just trying to give you guys an option to almost require that. But for us and what we're thinking, it would not be a threat. And I think market does want a nice walkable front store frontages, right, where you can walk down the street and walk right into a business versus walking through a busy parking lot. So for us, I don't think it would hinder an application. But again, we were just trying to take away some of the comments that we saw and some of the ideas of really trying to almost force the frontage of the commercial in there to show you our intent really is to bring some good commercial right up along 99. Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, that concur with what Jerry was saying, that it was an extra add that we were putting in there just to make sure that the intent was followed, that the commercial was placed up front. I think in most scenarios when you're doing a mixed use like this, you would want to place the commercial on the street anyway, because that's just it's the most efficient way to plan the site. So I think that's the way it would end up. There will always be some drive aisle or some, vehicle traffic to bring cars in. But I don't think you would plan necessarily with a parking lot between the buildings and the street. Although without the frontage requirement, there wouldn't be a restriction on that.
Right, that's a good point. I think it's also important that we mention to the commissioners that one of the conversations we had was, what if we have a corner property with 2 frontages? How do we consider that? And there was general agreement that it should be the primary frontage, and that would be dictated by the higher order classification street in the TSP. So it's probably going to be 99E. It's probably going to be 3rd Street in most cases. So that didn't seem like it would be a big concern if there was a corner property, how to calculate or define that frontage. What other questions does the Planning Commission have at this point? We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and well-informed and prepared to move forward with recommended code language.
Sounding pretty quiet out there. I'm hearing crickets. So, does Phil, Brad, I haven't heard a lot from you, Brad. Do you have any concerns? Mark?
No, I read through the packet pretty thoroughly and have been staying apprised. Yeah, so far I feel like I'm pretty well informed. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Holly.
Yeah, no, this is Brad. I appreciate all the information. Jerry and Seth have provided us good information.
All right, well, with that, Holly, do you have anything more you want to add to this before we move to public hearing?
I do not. I just want to confirm that the recommended code language includes the minimum 30% ground floor commercial footprint. And of that 30%, it is not businesses affiliated with the multifamily component or the residential component. And of the building frontage facade, whichever building is along the front, that I believe we have a 90% commercial on the ground floor. But as it's presented for the public hearing, we do not have a requirement that 50% of the frontage is occupied by a commercial building up front, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense, and
Okay.
that could probably be adjusted. So, if we want to insert language, but
Okay.
And this is just to get clear. This is so we've been working. I mean, obviously, this is a recommendation to City Council. They've been involved in some of this process up to this point, and they're on board with sort of that language, Holly.
I would defer to Sean. I don't know what conversations there's been and if they've been updated since the last compromise version.
No, so thank you, Holly. The only conversations that I have had with council is to continue the work on this. We haven't gone into the details of what the revised language is, so they are not aware of this. I wanted the opportunity for the Planning Commission to make their recommendation to council, so details have not been discussed.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, let's go ahead and unless somebody else has something pressing, I'm gonna move on into the public hearing part of this meeting. So that would bring us to item number 3, legislative amendment LA 2024-03. And I will go ahead. It is 7 o'clock. Good evening. My name is Glenn Holm. I am chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission. I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set in the public hearing in the matter of legislative amendment LA 2024-03, amendments for the Hubbard Development Code commercial zone to allow for horizontal mixed-use development. This hearing is now open. It is 7:01 p.m. Oregon land use law requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, the legal script. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, the City of Hubbard Comprehensive Plan, and the Oregon Statewide Planning Goals. The specific criteria are summarized in the staff report and will be reviewed at this hearing. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised no later than the close of the record of the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by those in support of the code amendments. Then those opposed to the code amendments will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the amendments. All speakers should try to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly for the record. before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that, either before or after you speak, please submit that material to city staff. Just one revision to that script. At this time, the City of Hubbard is not requiring your physical address. Simply your name and mailing address provided to staff is sufficient for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow planning commissioners a few questions. I need to ask if there are any objections to the notice that was published. Are there any declarations of bias by any member of this body? Are there any declarations of conflict by any member of this body? And hearing none, I will send it back to you, Holly, to give the staff report. And you're muted yet.
Okay. So let's screen share here. That might be most helpful. Okay, this is a very short staff report this evening. This is work that's been in motion for some months now, and so just a brief review of some of the applicable decision criteria here. As a reminder, a legislative amendment is a type 4 procedure, which is a planning commission recommendation following public hearing to the city council. The city council makes a final decision following public hearing, and then amendments to the Hubbard Development Code are enacted by an ordinance. Certain notices are required to the DLCD and newspaper. We've also mailed notices to all property owners of commercially zoned property within city limits. In the staff report, I've provided a little bit of background to remind us where we've been and how this discussion has evolved. And then I've included a copy of the zone map just to remind ourselves the properties that we're discussing this evening. Again, the general commercial zone is predominantly along the east side of Pacific Highway 99E, as well as along 3rd Street. The Hubbard Development Code does include some decision criteria, but it also points to the Hubbard Comprehensive Plan. As a reminder, when a city's comprehensive plan is acknowledged by DLCD, it is determined to be consistent with the Oregon statewide planning goals. Just as a reminder, Goal 1 is about citizen involvement and participation, and Goal 2 is about the procedures that we use to make decisions at the City of Hubbard related to legislative amendments. So those are the opportunities for the public to get involved in the notices that are provided. Most important this evening are Goal 9 and 10. Goal 9 is about economic development and Goal 10 is about housing. The purpose of revising the Hubbard Development Code to allow for horizontal mixed use is to allow for developments that are providing additional housing for residents in Hubbard, while also balancing that with the needs of local businesses to grow, expand, and relocate their businesses within Hubbard. And it is staff's hope that the compromised language provided this evening strikes that balance between expanding opportunities for housing while also preserving our employment land to be employment land first and foremost. The comprehensive plan talks about providing a variety of housing options within walking distance of the commercial districts, and this evening's code package really strikes at that theme. So Exhibit A to the staff report is the proposed code language itself, and again, that's very brief as well. There's a proposal to add a new definition for mixed-use development. There's proposed language to the purpose of the commercial zone to make a reference to mixed-use developments in there. And then under the permitted uses within the commercial zone, that list already includes item E, which is dwelling units, and it previously said accessory to a permitted use or above a permitted use. That language is proposed to be struck, and the new language would say subject to the special mixed-use development standards. There are no proposed changes to the dimensional standards of this zone, so that's things like setbacks and height limits. And all of the current development standards would continue to apply. And so that means parking, signage, landscaping, stormwater, those would all continue to apply to developments in this zone. The bulk of the new language would be in the special mixed-use development standards, and this would be in item H under the development standards of the C zone. And this is really where we get to the nuts and bolts of the horizontal mixed-use proposal. So I'm going to go through those just as a review. The first one says that there would be no minimum or maximum density for the residential component of these mixed-use developments. So that means that someone could develop one dwelling unit on a mixed-use property, or they could potentially develop 20 if it meant all the other standards. So as a reminder, in most of our residential zones, there are requirements when a land division is performed to meet that density standard. But in this case, there would be no density range. 2 says there shall be no maximum lot coverage standard for a mixed-use development. In our residential zones, again, there's a lot coverage maximum that ensures that we are not completely covering all of our residential lots with pavement and buildings. But again, that's different for commercial zones. And so we would not be looking at a lot coverage standard for the mixed-use developments. 3 strikes at the balance between the commercial and residential components. This is where we have our compromise language. A minimum of 30% of the ground floor of the mixed-use development would be the commercial uses not affiliated with the residential component. So that would exclude the leasing office and then private recreational facilities exclusively serving the residents of that development. 4 states that the commercial uses shall occupy a minimum of 90% of the ground floor of the front building facade, or the building facade along the primary frontage. 5 states that mixed-use development shall be subject to 2.20705 screening and buffering standards. As a reminder, those standards require screening around garbage dumpsters and landscape buffering around large parking lots. These are good neighbor standards. 6 is that mixed-use development shall provide landscaping consistent with our landscaping section, and that this would meet that 10% requirement for commercial. And then 7 is the outdoor play area requirements. This is language that we have in our R3 zone, which is our high density residential zone for multifamily developments with more than 5 dwelling units. So this language was taken from that section. Just as a reminder, the standard is a minimum play area of 500 square feet plus 50 square feet for each bedroom. Play areas are furnished with properly maintained equipment, fencing where along driveways and parking lots. Play areas are not located within the front or side yard setbacks. They're not within the stormwater detention areas. They could be broken into multiple locations if they meet minimum dimensions. And then if no children are allowed by covenant, an adult leisure area of the same size would be provided. Just pointing out one standard that's omitted from the R3 language In the R3 zone, play areas are required to be centrally located and visible from all residential units. In this application for a mixed-use development, that wouldn't make sense, and so that language has been omitted from the recreation area standard. So that concludes my staff report, fairly brief. I'm happy to answer any questions if you like. I know that we have other staff online as well to help answer questions. The recommended motion is included on the bottom of page 6. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, any questions for Holly? Or for other staff members? I don't think I have any specific questions, so let's go ahead and move on. I will now accept public testimony regarding this case. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support of the amendments?
Hello, Commissioner. My name is Jerry Jones. I'm with Mocker Management and Development, and I'm here in support of this. I just wanted to reiterate the collaboration that has been placed with the property owner and us and the consultant team with staff, not just Sean and Vicky of Hubbard, but Holly as well, and really feel that the work that we've done over the last many months have culminated here tonight to a collaboration of compromise that we feel would work for many different properties within Hubbard and really act as catalysts to bring thoughtful commercial as well as mixed use, meaning residential or even office, to the city of Hubbard. So again, just want to come here and speak in favor of this and also say an appreciation of the hard work that staff's put in with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Anybody else in support? Seeing none, we'll move on to, is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition? Seeing nobody raising their hands there. Is there anyone who would like to speak neither for nor against the amendments? And do any of the planning commissioners have any need to address the testimony that was provided?
I had just one comment. Seth put out a beautiful colored map, if you will, and I don't think it's to scale, so I don't know how to accept you know, if he's going to show us what commercial, I guess it's not to scale, but sure acts like it's filling in more of the residential than the commercial or vice versa. So that's my only comment.
Thank you, Phil. Did you want to comment on that, Holly?
So during tonight's work session, the Planning Commission was provided diagrams that illustrate basically different development scenarios with a balance of residential and commercial. Those diagrams are not entered yet into the record of the public hearing, but they sure could be. They are a part of the meeting packet this evening. If it would be helpful for the Planning Commission's decision or any of the staff or public information, we certainly could do so. If there's a recommendation from the Planning Commission also that those diagrams be revised to illustrate the proposed compromise, if Planning Commission thought it would be helpful for City Council, I imagine we could do that as well.
I think that would be super helpful because that will show us exactly what fits and what doesn't. Those colored boxes are great, but they're not to what I believe we're making a mistake allowing 30%. So I would strongly recommend that.
Staff would like to enter in diagrams provided by, correct me if I'm wrong, Sage Architecture that were used in tonight's work session with the recommendation that those diagrams be revised and updated to reflect the current language in Exhibit A and provided to the City Council for illustration purposes. Is that accurate?
To scale, that's the only thing I would add.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Holly, for taking that on, making it part of the record. Okay, before I close or continue the public hearing, are there any additional questions from the Planning Commission to staff or anyone? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners or staff may speak. Hearing non-public testimony is now over. I will close this public hearing at 7:18 p.m. and I will now entertain discussion on amendments or a motion or further discussion.
So just in terms of discussion, and apologies, I had some technical difficulty and crashed out for a couple minutes. I'm inclined to believe staff when they say that this is a good compromise. I think I can support this as written.
I'm in full agreement with you. So I think this is a great compromise.
Brad, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I fall in line with what Phil's saying, that I would like to see a little more percentage of commercial.
And then Phil, do you have any more comments? I understand I understand your reservations.
No, I really don't. It just going forward, if you guys truly look at the city of Hubbard, we really don't have a lot of residential neither, but we don't have a lot of commercial. And I get where the residential and the commercial mix works. It does. Vertically, I think that was perfect, and if they could build 5 stories up, so be it. It would still be commercial, basically the footprint of the piece of property, whatever square footage that property is. So if we now allow people to do 30% of that commercial piece of property, whatever the square footage is, and then the rest of residential, it just doesn't make sense. And that's why I have brought up the concerns here. So that would be my last comment.
And I fully appreciate what Mr. Jones said. He has a client who really likes Hubbard and has been in Hubbard for many years and only has the best of plans for this. But we also have to look further down the road to other commercial ventures.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Phil. Go ahead, Pat.
Thinking about the undeveloped land, it's kind of a chicken and an egg question here. You have to have a certain amount of population and population density before you can support the businesses. And I think where I'm coming down on this is that Hubbard, it's a great little town, but it doesn't quite have the population to support some of the increased commercial that we want. So if we want to get that commercial development, the way to do that is to loosen up some of these restrictions and kind of let the market forces decide how much is going to be commercial and how much is going to be residential.
I would agree with what you've just said. Let the market do its business. But again, we'll just call it commercial and residential zoning. So I believe there is a place for residential and there's a place for commercial, and 50% I think is a great compromise, but the city is leaning towards 30. So I develop properties, do commercial and residential. So I see a, the guy said, Jerry said that the guy who owns the property, he's been here forever. Great. We're not worried about him. He could have come in and maybe asked for a variance, or maybe not. I don't even know. But I could easily, money is money, and people come in. They build, most people build houses. That's where you can sell them, because everybody needs a roof over their head, and that's where I believe that we will lose our commercial zoning land, if you will, as much land or as little land as we have. It'll be built up with something residential, and 30%. Yeah, so that's it. That's all I'm going to say.
I think my only comment would be I've lived here for 50 years on the on the east side of 3rd Street. There is one building, and it has not changed. And 3rd Street could be a really, really vibrant part of the city, and it's not. So I think we need to make it more attractive for things to happen there, and other places throughout the city. I definitely. I'm a little worried with the percentage too, Phil. I totally get what you're looking at, but I also look at what has developed and what has not, and what has not moved for decades. And I would like to see some development that would be both beneficial for the community, would fit into the the vibe, the culture that that permeates here. So that's just my 2 cents.
I think I think it might allow us. Uh-oh, my speaker went crazy. But that horizontal application or what we're talking about, letting people do residential and horizontal, is going to spur quite a bit of activity in town. I believe that. But, maybe 30% is going to be fine. But that's my concern. So, but on moving forward, I promise you things will change. People will start putting in, just because of the residential part of it, they will be putting in more commercial and more residential at the same time, and the residential being the driver.
I guess with that, I'd like to make a motion to do option A. Recommend that City Council approve legislation amendment package LA 2024-03, the revisions to the Hubbard Development Code, and adopt the findings contained in the staff report, directing staff to prepare enacting ordinances.
I just add as a note, is that as presented?
As presented, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would second that motion.
Have a motion, a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
I believe the ayes have it. Do you want me, Vicky, do you want me to do a roll call vote?
I think that might be good. I'm thinking everyone voted yes except for Phil, but we probably should clarify that.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote. As I call your name, please say aye or nay. Mark?
Aye.
Phil?
Nay.
Brad?
Nay.
Pat?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, anything else we need to cover or we need to be looking forward to? And this is a recommendation to clarify. So this is a recommendation. City still has to move forward with with an up or down vote on which way council would like to go. So this is literally a recommendation moving forward. It is not a binding, just to clarify. So, but anything from you, Holly, for stuff coming up or things we need to be looking for?
We will plan to have a planning commission meeting in January.
Okay.
We will have a public hearing that evening.
Perfect. All right, well, I would just tell everybody to keep an eye out for that information. And if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Seeing that we're the end of our agenda.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and your service to Hubbard. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Happy holidays to everybody.
Thanks, Vicky.